All right, everybody, welcome back to the third and final presentation of the day. I'd like to introduce Jay Simmons, the founder and president of Mach 30. I met Jay when I was in Dayton, Ohio at the Air Force grad school, and we got to talking about why he was there, a civilian, not doing the military thing, but he talked about his interest in space. One thing led to another. It led to a lunch at Tropical Smoothie Cafe.
Yeah.
He said some things that I found interesting, like democratizing space and open source spaceflight hardware, and the rest is history. But Jay is, like I mentioned, AFIT student up until recently, PhD in space systems engineering. He spends his nights leading a revolution in space systems development, hence Mach 30. And Jay's vision combines his years working at volunteer nonprofit organizations with his experiences using open source software and tools, open source tools in small business. So Jay, I'll leave it to you.
All right, thank you very much, Greg. Next slide. So everyone else's story tends to be, I met Mach 30, like Greg was saying, by meeting Jay. So how did I meet Mach 30? I actually met it through this Moleskine notebook right there. That's like a closet last week to take this picture, take a new picture of it. A few years ago, I was very disenchanted and frustrated with the state of spaceflight on planet Earth, quite honestly. I had been a very big fan of NASA for all of my life, and I'd finally sat through one too many promises of we're going back to the moon in 10 years, this time we promise. And I just become completely I was at my wit's end. So I started just really chewing on it. I don't know if you guys do that, where you just get stuck thinking about a thing. You can't put it away. And so I became convinced there's got to be a better way than what we're doing now. There must be a better way. And then I started talking to people about it. In particular, I talked all my good friends' ears off about it. And my partner, Maureen, I think must have been sick of hearing me talk about there must be a better way and say the same diatribe every other night. And she buys me this little black notebook. And she says, instead of telling me, tell it. I'm like, okay. So I started writing. Writing. And slowly but surely, what would become Mach 30 started to take shape in the pages of this notebook. Next. One of the things that was in there that was a repeated pattern, what drove me the most crazy as I sat here and pondered why are we not back at the moon, was the realization that everyone that started a space company, because we'd seen a new emergence of commercial space, but every single one of these people, what was the first thing they did? They went and built their own rocket engine. And then they went and built their own rocket. We're talking about repeating NASA's work from the 60s and 70s, and it's the early 2000s, and all we're doing is doing that same thing. Next. Do you know what the difference is between commercial space and NASA and Mach 30, aside from budgets? When one of these guys solves a problem, the next guy to come along has to solve the same bloody problem. When Mach 30 solves a problem, we share the process, the results, everything. So it's solved for everyone. We do this through open sourcing everything at Mach 30. Next. As Greg said, I am Jay Simmons. I'm the founder and president of Mach 30. I hold an MS and a PhD in space systems engineering. Rocket science, really, is all that means. And one of my key roles at Mach 30 is to lead all of our open source initiatives. Next. So exactly what do I mean when I say we open source everything at Mach 30? Yeah, next. Well, naturally, all of our hardware projects are open source hardware. If you know Arduino and you know the open source ecology and things like that, then you know what the open source hardware logo means. Next. We also, though, freely license all of our business practices and our experiences dealing with legal and regulatory issues. Next. And finally, even though our primary focus is on developing open source spaceflight hardware as a means of hastening the advancement of humanity into a spacefaring civilization, we develop a great deal of open source engineering tools because we often find ourselves lacking the tools we need. And so when we find out that there is not a good CAD program out there that's open source, or there's not a good mathematical documentation tool, or a whatever, or a good even place to host projects, we go and contribute to or write our own open source software to solve those problems. Again, sharing it with everyone in the community. I really do mean open source all the things. Next slide. So, what is open source hardware itself like at Mach 30? Well, it's more, to us, it's more than just publishing the final designs and the assembly instructions. For us, it's the entire life cycle. Imagine going to an open source software project and the only thing that's there is the user manual and the executable, maybe the source code by itself, but nothing in terms of, there's no forums, there's no design discussions. It's just people worked in a dark room and then poof, magic, something happened. No, for us, that's not that happens a lot in hardware, and for us, that's not enough. So we post the entire process. This includes all of our concepts, our trials and errors. Next slide. And our successes and failures. GroundSphere is actually has a lovely example of that last piece of sharing our failures. So as everyone else has already told you, GroundSphere is a low-cost satellite receiving station. That particular one meant to receive signals from a very particular CubeSat. It's got an electronics that are stored in the base, and one of our engineers wanted to, in order to pad those electronics, really easy way, he wanted to use expanding foam to create the form-fit pieces for the electronics to sit in. And then a certain someone over here, board member Jeremy Wright, said, so what happens if the electronics fry and spark? Would there be a fire? And the engineer, or volunteer engineer, looked and said, I'm using the fireproof foam. Should be good. Jeremy here, did you test it? Well, no, but now you mention it, I'll go do that. Give me a couple days. Next slide. Here's the result of that test. First off, clearly we did not use this. Very clearly. It turns out that this stuff is great if you have a fire burning in your wall for not burning as fast as other things will burn. But if you put a piece of electronics and over voltage it to break it on purpose, it turns into a lovely bit of fawn blade electronics. The other thing that's important, though, is we documented every detail about that experiment and the results, the product numbers, what we did on our design site, on Open Design Engine, under the project. And we thought it was such an important lesson, especially that bit about, well, did you test it? That we published that story on our blog. I took this photo off of our blog. Okay, we did not hide this. We shared this as loudly as we share successes. And we think that's essential to open source hardware, because the last thing I want anyone else to do is to go make the same mistakes that I already made. Talk about reinventing the wheel. Now you're reinventing a square wheel. What's the point in that? Next slide. Of course, we do actually publish the final designs. I'm not saying we don't do that, right? And because of that, all the details there are necessary that you need in order to make one of your own, or fork it, or mash it up with other design ideas, are freely available for you to do that. Which is just what the Jones boys did. Jeremy talked about them a little bit. They took the data acquisition system and the signaling protocol from the Shepherd test stand and lifted that out of our plans and used it on their test stand of their own design as part of a science fair project. And they've won awards from that, including one from the AIAA, if I remember correctly. Which to me is absolutely the kind of story that I want to hear about Mach 30 stuff. I want to hear not only that whole Mach 30 systems are being used, but that people are taking the pieces of our systems and the lessons from our systems and mashing them up in their own work, building an ever-growing body of open source materials around spaceflight. Next. I also mentioned that everything we write on our website, so mentioned that our business practices are also open source. We do this because everything on our website is under the CC BY license, the Creative Commons Attribution Only license. I don't need you to treat it virally. I just need you to acknowledge you got it from us, right? And this is more than just our blog posts. All of our business practices are up on our website. All the minutes for our meetings, all of our lessons about regulation are all up there, all licensed under the same license. Next. So you want to use our decision-making tools, right down to the exact forms and procedures? Please be my guest, go ahead. It's there, right there for you to use. Next. Want to know how to register for a 501c3 status to turn your new organization into an actual nonprofit with the IRS? And by the way, I'm not aware of anyone else that goes to the length of details that we did. Trust me, I looked because I wanted to copy off of them. Every single communication with the IRS that we did, every time that we filled out another line of the form, every bit of the process is there. So please, if you want to start a 501c3, come see our site. Next. We're repeating that level of detail and intentionality about how we approach regulation and business processes with how we handle insurance. And this is where we're keeping all of that raw material right now. Next. And perhaps the most notable thing that we do is publish all of our information about how to deal with the regulations dealing with export controls. The Export Control Task Force is a committee of ours that's made up of primarily Mach 30 volunteers, but we always invite guests from other organizations. We've had several come by for various meetings or various tasks that we worked on. And we publish all of our forms like the ITAR-EZ, all of our lessons learned about what it really means to be right with export controls, so that when we figure that out, no one else has to do it again. Next. One of those things that I think escapes a lot of people about open source hardware is that if you use proprietary tools to do the design, then what you've done is create a situation where only people that can afford the proprietary tools can participate in the process. Because of that, Mach 30 is committed to using open source engineering tools in all of our projects. And when we cannot find sufficient open source tools, like I said, we either go out and find promising projects to lend our hands to bring them up to where we need them, or we start projects of our own, hopefully mashing up from existing technologies. The last thing we want to do is start from absolutely a clean sheet. Next. The work we're doing on Yavin, which is our current hardware project, which is the cold gas thruster that we were talking about on earlier talks, is actually driving 2 open source software development projects at Mach 30. The first is what we call the Mathematics Toolkit. If you know MathCAD, think of it as an open source version of that. Something that allowed me to write equally well detailed textual explanations of why this math is relevant to an engineering or science problem, as well as to flip gears and turn around and actually do the math and document the results in line without having to copy and paste. And if you do engineering work and you want to for anything that might go boom, which our stuff has that possibility, you know how critical it is to be able to share the work that you're doing to make sure your math is correct. I want someone to look over my work, please, when I do math. I may have a PhD, but I am not too proud to say, would you please take a look and make sure I did this right? MTK is an essential element to that. CAD is another huge thing. There's all sorts of bits and pieces lying around in the open source community, but there's not a good, solid answer yet. And when we went and looked at that problem, we found a project called CAD Query, and we decided that was closer to anything else. And so we make significant contributions to the point that Jeremy is a registered committer on their repository on GitHub. And that work is absolutely essential to being able to do detailed drawings. You need a reliable CAD package. Next slide. But developing open source engineering tools is not a new phenomenon at Mach 30. It may be something that's being driven a lot by Yavin right this minute. But even on day one, we sat down and said, what should we do for our first hardware project? And then we started kicking around things like the test stand, which is eventually what we chose. We said, so where are we going to publish the designs? We looked around and we're like, the source code ones aren't really good for what we need to do. And so we looked around, we talked to other open source hardware groups, and we said, I think we need to make one. And so the very first project actually that Mach 30 did wasn't hardware. It was software. It was open design engine, so that we would have a place and others would have a place to host open source hardware. And today we continue to run open design engine. If you want to host open source hardware projects, completely free to use. You just have to be licensed under an acceptable open source license. Next. All right. In summary, everyone's favorite 2 words in a presentation, right? Just shared with you Mach 30's philosophy for developing open source engineering tools when there aren't ones available that will do the job. Before that, I discussed how we actually open source the organization itself by publishing all legal information and business processes. Before that, I showed you how Mach 30 develops its open source hardware projects, that it's more than just publishing the plans. And of course, I opened with that story about how I met Mach 30, which was through that notebook instead of by meeting. Next. So what do you guys think? If you like what you see, if you want to learn more, you want to keep up with the latest news, you want to join our projects, then please be sure you take one of the handouts. All of our relevant URLs are there. Like Greg said, follow, circle, reshare, retweet, whatever it is for that social media, we're there. Connect with us, come to our website, and of course, feel free to talk to us personally. And then last slide, of course, ad astra precipitatum. All right. Oh, we got there's a question. I'm not supposed to take it. I'll get with you in the back, I promise. Thank you all very much.